Managers of Reddit, what was an excuse an employee gave that you thought was BS till you saw proof? Not the manager, but the employee. I had requested my birthday off months in advance, but it wasn't approved. So I just sucked it up and cancelled my plans. About a week before my birthday, a friend of mine died in a car accident and their funeral was scheduled on my birthday. As soon as I knew, I told my manager what happened and that I would not be coming in. She scoffed and told me that I was just trying to get out of work for my birthday. The funeral existing wasn't enough. I had to prove that I actually went. Edit. Wow. I got on a plane, and when I got off I was shocked to see so many responses. Thanks for your condolences, and I'm so sorry to hear of your losses as well. Losing someone can be really hard. This particular manager just did not believe me. I was a teenager and I guess it was too coincidental for her. I brought her the memorial cards and showed her a picture of me with a group of others in front of the funeral home. She still didn't really believe me. I thankfully have not worked for that company in a long time. Really love my job now. A frequent absentee rushed into my office without knocking, saying he had to go home immediately because of not feeling well. This guy had used so many alibis to skip work, even his workmates didn't trust him anymore. I stalled, taking note of his abysmal work record, bright eyes and healthy looking ruddy cheeks, and then decided to give him a stern lecture on workplace absenteeism until he projectile vomited all over my desk, family photos, budget reports and an open laptop. Trying to avoid that tsunami, I launched my chair backwards, smacking my head on a bookshelf. Through the stars, I could see chunky bits and stinking slime everywhere. I can only conclude it must have been a cold pizza breakfast with a liter of cola. I know some fakers can do that on demand, but I didn't bother to investigate. I suddenly had more pressing problems, plus I guess white eyes and a ruddy complexion can be a bad sign too. Edit. Changed Coke to cola. The guy was pretty wasted, but probably not sniffing anything, to my knowledge. Had a staff member say she'd been in a car accident and couldn't work. We literally have this excuse every other week from our staff. I was not impressed. Turns out she was riding her bike to work and was hit by a car. She ended up in the ICU and the hospital called us as we were her next of kin. She ended up having a lot of surgery, but recovered within a few months. I paid her a few weeks of pay, so she didn't go to broke. She was a casual and not entitled to pay until she got back on her feet. So, on at least one occasion a car accident has been true. NB people are blowing up my inbox about her using us as a next of kin. Don't worry guys, she is a foreign national in our country and her overseas family don't speak English. She also worked directly with me as a nanny for my daughter, so we were somewhat close. We have further emergency contacts for all our staff, so we could have made further contact, if necessary. She recovered from the ICU stay quickly. She's Japanese and hates to make a fuss about anything. I believe to her mind she was just being logical. She still works with us, and is back with her clients, who were beside themselves with worry, and who all sent her flowers. Something like this happened to me 2 months ago now. My housekeeper locked the door behind her because it wouldn't stay closed for some reason, and then it turned out the landlord had put something on the lock that inadvertently prevented my key from going all the way through to unlock the door from the inside. So I had to wait for a coworker to show up, throw my key from my kitchen window to her on a walkway, and if I'd missed it fell down. God knows what would have happened, since I only had the one key for myself, and have her unlock it from the outside. I arrived at work about an hour late, but my boss was fine. His boss had suggested I throw the key out the window, which wasn't a good sign. Then, a couple of hours later, another co-worker came into work and told me that the landlord changed the locks and removed the offending device to ensure something like that didn't happen again. In addition to my new keys, for some reason I had been given both the device and the old lock, which I still have. I worked as an employee, not a client, in a work program for recovering alcoholics. The idea being that after rehab, and for many years of alcoholism, they need to slowly build their labor market skills. Part of the program was that each of our clients had to do a breathalyzer test each morning, and there couldn't be any alcohol in their breath. This was important because some of them were not sober, but should learn to control their alcohol on days before work, and b, if someone had a relapse, we wanted to know. Clients who weren't sober had to go home. Foremost, this was actually a punishment, because they wanted to work, and wanted to have something useful to do. We had this client who was awesome, always on time, did extra work, and was actively working to get back control of her life. She was hit hard, lost her job, relapsed into alcohol after 2 earlier episodes, but was dry after rehab, and on a good track, getting invited to job interviews, getting along with her family again, etc. We knew she was sober, and had enough self-control to stay sober, yet she still had to do alcohol tests. If you are unfamiliar with them, it's a small electronic device on which plastic tubes are put for hygiene reasons. After each use, the tube gets thrown away, the breathalyzer gets disinfected, and a new tube is put on. One day, this latest test showed she was quite intoxicated. Our social worker was like, what the fuck? The lady was like, what the fuck? The social worker was about to send her home, and the lady asked for a second test. It came back at 0. Turns out, the disinfectant was 99.9% ethanol, which is a really good disinfectant. A couple of drops remained on the breathalyzer, and that is a story of how we learned that the breathalyzer test can have false positives due to the disinfectant. I worked at a 7 to 11 out of college. Lived in a rich area, so it was kind of a weird 7 to 11. Rich white high schoolers worked the register instead of poor Indian dudes. My coworkers were the kind of kids whose families were wealthy enough that they didn't have to make their children work at all, but force them to anyways, just to build character. Anyhow, a lot of these kids' families owned horses. My family wasn't nearly rich enough, but it was real common around the area. The town itself was literally called Colt's Neck. So eventually I became a shift manager. Woo. And one day, a kid calls in saying he's gonna be late. I ask why. He says, bullshit. Naturally, I'm confused. What? I ask. Bullshit, he responds. He sends me a picture, but it's completely indecipherable. Blurry and beyond recognition. Impossible to distinguish. But my first guess was that I was maybe looking at literal bullshit. Now, I'm no bovine expert, but it seemed to me like he was making this sheet up. This sheet was simply too outlandish. This sheet was too strange of an excuse not to come to work. There was no way his scapegoat could really just be bullshit. It had to be BS. But I ignore it. I wait until he shows up. And then he finally does. And then he finally shows me. Sure enough, he had dropped his Merced's keys in a pile of loose animal droppings. And sure enough, it was not bullshit. It was horse shit. And if I didn't see it for my own 2 eyes, I'd probably think it was just a bullshit excuse. Edit guys, this was a joke. Sorry, thought it was kinda obvious. This one was me. A few years back, my birthday was on a weekend. I had taken Monday off work, but then Thursday night something went wrong. I woke up sometime after feeling really messed up with a sticky face, so got out of bed and turned on a light. My room looked like a crime scene. Nightstand knocked over, blood soaking my sheets, on the floor, smeared on the walls and door frames heading towards the bathroom, all over the sink, and staining a towel horribly. I had had a grand mal seizure in my sleep, fell out of bed, and hit my head repeatedly on my nightstand, cutting it up real bad. Sometime after that I got up and tried to clean myself up and went back to bed, but was still so messed up that I have no recollection of it. Posticle. I then woke up sometime later to find the blood everywhere. So I'm standing there, feeling miserable and looking at myself, thinking, there's no way I can go into work tomorrow, but I have to let my boss know, and I don't want him to think I'm just trying to extend my birthday weekend. So I snapped a picture of myself in the mirror, smeared with blood, face bruised and swollen, and texted it to him at like 2 in the morning with a message that I wouldn't be coming in due to having a seizure. I then cleaned myself up, changed the sheets, and went back to sleep. Edit. Smashed up face. I was an opening shift manager at McD's at the age of 18. We had a hurricane come through, only a Cat 2, which for us isn't too much cause for concern. However, I lived in the Bahamas, so I was flooded in. I called my boss, and told her that I wouldn't be in until I could safely drive, which wasn't going to be until the lake surrounding our house dried up. She kept pushing me, asking how long until I could get into open. I was like, when you can send a boat to sail me in? I'm literally surrounded by water. I can't see the road at all. I'm sure there is flooding all the way into town. So, yeah, I don't think I'm coming in today. She threatened to fire me if I couldn't get in. I threatened to sue if she did. The most mind-boggling thing to me was she lived closer to the store than I did and just went through the same faking hurricane. Beach. If you are not in a flooded area, you open the store. Damn. Right before I got out of the army, I had a new guy that was just a total fuck up. Bought a truck at like 18% interest, got credit cards at like 15% interest, went out to state without even telling anyone where he was going, was always late, and to top it off, he married a stripper. He was your basic stupid private. Well, one day he's not at PT formation. We are calling him, and he doesn't answer, so we go to his barracks room. Says he has a migraine and he's not going. We tell him that he should have gone to sick call and he'll get in all kinds of shit for not going to PT. He says he'll take the counseling statement. Well, my platoon sergeant was faking pissed when he found out. Was gonna give him an Article 15, which means he'd lose rank, pay and be put on extra duty. Well, an hour later I get a call from the clinic. He was there on an 4th, passed out. Apparently he had put me down as his emergency contact. We told the platoon sergeant and he just let everything go. Years ago, my boyfriend at the time, now husband, took me to an outdoor concert. I'm fair-skinned. I had put sunscreen on that morning, but accidentally left it in his vehicle. It was overcast at first, so I wasn't super worried. We ended up having to leave the concert early because I got so burned. My parents took me to an emergency clinic. When the nurse rubbed the cream on me, my dad said he could hear me scream from the waiting room. Burned on both legs and both arms. I couldn't really walk. I'll let work know, and they were nice about it, but you could tell that by the 4th day they were not believing it. I showed up on the 5th day not because they asked me to, but I felt okayish. I waddled in, and they told me to go home. They were just absolutely stunned by the state of me. Thank the Lord I'm not allergic to aloe. That would have been miserable. When I read that, my heart just dropped into my stomach. As an employee living with severe migraine-like headaches and another neurological condition, I've had a few occasions where I've literally been within a block of work and had a headache hit that dropped me to the ground, and I've had to call from the back of the ambulance saying I won't be in. Numerous times I had to bail mid-shift, and I felt like some of the staff thought I just didn't want to work. Then one night I was having a brutal pain day, but I was literally the only dishwasher on staff at that point, so was doing my best to grin and bear it. I managed to hold on until the end of the night as we were cleaning up after close. The last thing I remember is grabbing onto the shelf at the back end of the dishwasher and then being in hospital mid-afternoon the next day, surrounded by doctors and family, fully in the midst of a conversation. Apparently I'd been answering questions for an hour at that point. The supervisor who'd been working the night before had always seemed skeptical of my issues, but after that night she bent over backwards to make my shifts as easy as possible for me. Happened to me. I'd left my homework in my locker, so my teacher let me go get it. On the way back from getting it, I see a police dog sitting, tied up, outside a bathroom. Obviously, a policeman was inside, using the facilities, so I get near the dog, and just said, "Hey boy, how you doing?" Upon me talking to the dog, he barks loudly, jumps up, and bites/snatches my homework out of my hand and just straight up eats it. I'm standing there like, what the fuck just happened, and look around just in case anyone saw that, but no one was around. I found the whole situation so bizarre that I couldn't help but laugh when I told my teacher and class what happened. Everyone just starts laughing, and obviously my teacher doesn't believe me. In fact, she called me a faking idiot, so she gives me a detention. I had to go to security and convince them to look up the incident, and after security stopped crying with laughter, I got a copy and showed my teacher. She was utterly speechless. This is my story I gave to my manager. First off, I had a rough childhood. Anyways, I got hired on as a dishwasher for Cracker Barrel at 16. Before the first day of work, 2 hours before, I called in to let the manager know I couldn't work there because my mom got mad at me and took away my phone and my car. At the time I lived with my grandparents and we were 20 miles out of town, so it was really hard to get there. The manager was the nicest person ever. He told me to call him back when I'm able to start working. A few weeks later my mom gives me my car back, but I ended up taking another job at Wendy's. A few months later the manager from Cracker Barrel calls me and asks me if I'm doing okay and how everything worked out for me. He didn't care that I didn't come back, he just wanted to make sure I was okay because he could tell I was in a lot of emotional distress at the time. Best guy ever. I should have worked there. This was me. 2 years ago, while on my way to work I suddenly had an onslaught of non-stop coughing and had to be admitted into a hospital. I fell unconscious for an unknown period, waking up to tubes up my nose, and had to be admitted for about 2 months. I had no way of contacting my workplace obviously, so my boss was wondering about where I was. Midway through my stay, I had to call back and inform my boss about being admitted to hospital, but still could not go to work. The funny thing was, the medical certificate that the hospital gave me looked suspiciously like a forged one, since there was no logo, and it was all black and white, and my supervisor told me to get a proper one. So I had to get them to print something that looked more official. When I went back to work, I had to tell my boss that I could no longer work full time for him due to requiring dialysis treatment every other day. I was the employee. I had 2 friends commit suicide one day after the other. I found out about the first one on the day he died, right before I walked into work. They sent me home and gave me some time off. Second friend died that night, but I'd already had the rest of the week off to recover. Came in the next week to ask for the next 2 weekends off for funerals. They were confused and looked very skeptical when I said another had died. But they let it go because who's going to call out a grieving 17-year-old girl? My grandfather died the weekend of the second funeral. Went in for minor surgery on his toe and somehow an air bubble got into his fourth. Needed a 3rd weekend in a row off for a funeral. My manager looked at me and told me he knew I was lying because I needed time off from the grief of losing one friend. Yes, he did emphasize one, and that this is the last weekend he would comply. I came back after my grandfather's funeral with all 3 funeral pamphlets, a picture of me with my family at the funeral, and printed out screenshots from Facebook showing RIP posts on both friends' accounts. He honestly didn't even schedule me on the weekends after that. Not a manager, but when I was 14, I ended up waking up the Monday after spring break, around 5 AM, with the worst stomach pains of my life. My mom was the only one who believed I wasn't trying to buy an extra day of spring break. My dad told her she had to wait until the doctor's office opened as he was not paying a walk-in bill for me faking a stomachache. I wait until 9 AM and finally go see my doctor. He doesn't believe me either and tells me I probably have a UT and sends me home. He says if it gets worse, I can go up to the hospital for a CAT scan. By 1, I can't move and I'm crying because I'm in so much physical pain. My mom, bless her soul, takes me to the hospital and basically says screw my dad and the doctor. Yeah, I had appendicitis and my appendix had managed to tuck itself underneath my colon and was close to bursting. Needless to say, I was rushed into emergency surgery. Can this be about school? And not a teacher but a student? Fuck it, I'm doing it anyway. I was a nervous wreck my freshman year of high school, which turned my stomach into something worse than the abysmal cesspit it already was. I was a little better with the going home early and going to the nurse my sophomore year, but during my Spanish final I felt like garbage. Extreme stomach pain, sweating, faintness. I asked to go to the bathroom, had nothing but agony waiting for me there, and came back. Couldn't concentrate on the exam and said I had to go to the nurse. Teacher, who wasn't even the Spanish teacher, he was the only English teacher who didn't like me, said I had to finish. So I raced through the exam, which I failed, and booked it to the nurse's office. In the hall my guidance counselor passed and said hello, and I responded by throwing up in the water fountain. As she looked on in dawning, docile horror, her wet doe eyes wide and squeaking an oh my, I continued my token quest for the nurse's office. So I got there and she said it was stress. I was shouting at her at this point and made her call my mom. She said, well, he seems to be having a stress incident, to which I grabbed the phone and said, you need to take me to the hospital now. My mom got there, to the vehement denial of the nurse, that anything was wrong, and took me to my regular doctor. He looked at me for all of 2 seconds and said, I'm calling the hospital, to let them know you're on your way. He has appendicitis. Got there, had to take a bunch of those stupid tests, to drink the vanilla as whole, flavored milkshake that's actually just dye, to see on the scans, threw it up, they brought me into surgery and my appendix burst. As soon as they took it out next day I called the nurse from the hospital room, and said I was feeling better. She asked if my stress was gone and I said, no, my appendix is though. My mom would like to talk to you, TLDR. My high school nurse wouldn't let me leave school because she thought I was faking stomach pains and I had appendicitis. This will likely get buried and I'm on the other end of the stick here, but I'll post anyway. Point about a year ago I was working in retail. During that time, my grandfather passed away very suddenly. It was quite a shock. Rosters had already been put out and I was scheduled to work during the day of his funeral. I went to my manager and told her my grandfather had passed and I needed that day off to attend his funeral and mourn. She laughed and dismissed it, told me I was to show up that day or I would be fired. I requested the day off multiple times over and even referenced another employee who was given 3 days off to grieve her aunt's passing just a few weeks prior. All to no avail. I was continually told I would be fired if I didn't show up. I ended up having to race to work after the funeral, was 15 minutes late, reprimanded, and just spent the whole shift crying. A few hours later my dad, who was a regular at the store and very friendly with my manager, came in wearing a suit. My manager saw him and cheerfully exclaimed, you sure do look fancy today. What's the occasion? To which he just dead stared her and said /you/Natata Selector told you her grandfather's funeral was today. She seriously didn't believe me up until that point. I'm neither the manager nor the employee in question in this story, but I still feel like it's worth telling. When I was 16 or 17, I worked at a chain restaurant that wasn't quite fast food, but wasn't fancy or anything either. One afternoon I was coming in to start my evening shift when the other staff starts to inform me about a drama that is leaving us understaffed. One of our employees, who was very good and trustworthy might I add, had called in for his friend that had recently started. He informed the managers that his friend couldn't come in because he had died the night before. Now for some stupid reason I don't understand, our manager was convinced it was a lie and thought the employee probably got arrested, so he spent the entire morning shift checking the local arrest records. I didn't feel right about this because why would someone lie about their best friend dying suddenly, but everyone else was convinced too. By the time we closed that night, it was confirmed that he had drowned the night before while swimming with friends in the lake. They never recovered his body. I hope the managers learned a lesson about assuming, but I'm doubtful. Not the manager, but the employee. One Friday night after a shift as a cashier at Walmart when I was 19, at about 11:45 p.m. I was driving 70 miles per hour trying to get home through an industrial area of my town. All of a sudden right in front of the 3-meter plant I see a deer for a split second, then my airbags deployed. My car was totaled and I was banged up, but wasn't that bad till the next morning. So early the next day I call my manager saying I was going to miss my shift on Saturday evening. Yeah, busiest and worst shift in Walmart. She in a very rude tone told me that if I was going to not be there I needed to bring in a doctor's excuse. I wasn't even going to see a doctor, I was just going to rest up and be in for my Sunday evening shift the next day. Well, I went to urgent care, get examined. The doctor had just hit a deer herself going 70 miles per hour a few months earlier, so she gives me a note excusing me from work for a week due to my sprained ankle and other bruises and scrapes. The look on the manager's face when I limped up to her and handed that beach the note was priceless. She started turning red and could barely get out any words. She didn't last long as a manager because she was terrible, but I had my week off and worked there for another few months till I found a better job. Honestly, I still don't know if she really believed me, but when I asked a coworker who drove the same route I did to work in the mornings if he saw the deer carcass I'd hit in that spot on the way in, he said no, but I saw the pile of meat that was left from it. This will probably get buried, but I can finally contribute. Managing a restaurant in a small town of roughly 8,000 people in Canada. Opening serving is running a couple minutes late, not a big deal. I get a phone call from this server and they are hysterical on the phone. I can't come to work because someone blew up my neighbor. I'm a little taken back and ask concerned what? They reply the cops have to question me, they won't let me leave. Someone blew up my basement neighbor. I have to go, I won't be into work. I'm sorry, okay. So at this point I'm thinking, if they really wanted the day off they sure went through a lot of effort to make this story up. This is a small town in Canada. Nothing happens ever, so sure enough later in the day the police and fire department make some large takeout orders. I go up to the front and start chatting with a firefighter. He's white as a ghost and looks rattled. I ask what's going on, and he can only say he's never seen anything like it. I can't believe something like this would ever happen here, and he leaves. Okay, what's going on? Luckily, with it being a small town, word travels fast. Yes, someone blew up this employee's basement neighbor with a homemade bomb. She was disabled in her accident and this guy embezzled all her settlement money and decided to fix the problem by blowing her up in her home. Worst part is he sent a present to the house and she opened it when her daughter and helper were in the room. Thank God they were okay, but she unfortunately was killed. Needless to say, we gave the employee some well needed time off to deal with that as they were home during the explosion and were first on scene. Real messed up. This story even made international news. Now I give most excuses a chance cause at this point I don't really know what could be true or not. Our employee claimed downstairs neighbor was blown up by a bomb. They were telling the truth and we are home at the time. Cops wouldn't let them leave without questioning. Missed work, got extended time off cause that sheet will fuck with you. I have two and one was sweet revenge. First one, I had a stomach bug and was working at a daycare. Told the director I was sick. She told me to come in or be fired. So I went in. All morning I'd race to the bathroom because I thought I would throw up, only I never did. She thought I was faking to leave early. Until the last time. Didn't quite make it to the toilet. Got puke on the floor. I tried cleaning it up but didn't do a good job and she sent me home. The owner came in, smelled the puke and made her clean the bathroom. Love that story. Second one just happened. I was a nanny for a lady and sent her a text early one morning telling her I had food poisoning and couldn't come in. You could tell she didn't believe me. And a few hours later we actually called an ambulance to take me to the ER where I was diagnosed with a ruptured ectopic pregnancy and I was bleeding internally. My boss just so happens to work in the hospital they took me to, so I texted her later that evening and told her I couldn't come in and that I was in room 30th. She came to see me the next day, surprised as hell I was there. She even admitted she thought I was faking. I wasn't mad though. Hell, even I didn't realize it was as serious as it was. Had this exact same thing happen to me. Was managing a store and this employee that was actually really good at his job started to get sicker and sicker with stomach issues. He went multiple times to doctors and got scanned and even had a colonoscopy. But nothing was found, so he kinda himself concluded that it had to be mental issues and stress from various factors and asked me to lay him off for unemployment benefits and so on, which I did out of feeling extremely sorry for the guy and not wanting to add to his mental issues. Turns out that he collapsed at home because he had a benign tumor growth in his intestines or somewhere, had to have multiple surgeries to get rid of it. His surgeon really didn't understand how no one noticed this huge thing blocking his intestine. He put up a diagram of it on FB comparing it to various humorous stuff. He did apply for a job again at our company. I'd moved on up, but was listed as a reference and sang the guy praises, and he got a job there again. I've been that person calling in. I used to work for the NHS and as such had access to nurses' halls whilst I found somewhere permanent to live. The halls themselves were small rooms from the Victorian era, old heavy doors etc. Also cockroaches, rats and creepy old nurses. I woke up one morning ready to have a nice walk in the sun to work and pulled at my room door handle and it came apart in my hands, locking me in the room. I called my boss and she didn't believe me until I called the other office, based in another part of the building I lived in, to get the porter to come help me. I had 3 social workers come look and sure enough I was stuck. The mechanism had completely broken. I'd already tried using the square bit to turn the handle thing, and they had to break the door off its hinges and yank the whole lock and handle mechanism. It was a right palaver. Bonus story. Once had someone throw up on me in a staff lift making my way to my office. In the same job, I literally walked into the lobby and they all flinched. I managed to clean off the most of it, grab some scrubs, and went straight home to shower and recover. Had a teller call me and say she had an accident on the way to work. I said, oh my gosh, are you okay? She said she was fine, but it wasn't that kind of accident. Oh, she had an altercation with another teller the day before, so I didn't believe her. But then I was thinking who would call and say I crapped myself just to get out of work. Anyways, I went to my supervisor as I was still questioning it and found out that one of her medications made that an issue for her sometimes. So it was legit, and she had no shame in admitting it. Point at it. I forgot, I've been on the other end of this. We had a senior skip day thing and I ended up going to this pool party last minute. Well, I got this horrible sunburn. I think it classified as sun poisoning. My shoulders were covered in blisters. It hurt to move. I called into the restaurant I worked at and told my boss it was too bad and I was going to try to take an oatmeal bath. Not as fun as it sounds. And he said it could not be that bad and made me come in anyways. I got up, got dressed, and drove to work. I walked in the door and he stopped me. Let me see it. I pulled my collar back and he said, oh god, go home. So I left and went home. Still bitter he made me come in anyways. At the time this took place I was running a call center. The employee that this happened to we will refer to as CC was a compulsive liar. He had been in over 300 street fights and won them all. You know the type. C also had a habit of calling in late and missing work. One morning C calls me and tells me he won't be in until later because he was kidnapped by his distant cousin and some of his friends and tortured. Obviously I didn't believe this and actually laughed at C. We had a pretty good working relationship. After we got off the phone about 5 minutes go by and a detective shows up at our office looking for C. I took the detective into my office and asked him if what C said was true, to which the detective asked me what C had told me happened. I explained. He said his cousin and some of his cousin's friends came up from Texas and kidnapped him at gunpoint because he owed them money. They duct taped him to a chair in a basement and proceeded to torture him with some sort of military infusion device. This is what he called it, that looked like a mini flashlight with about 7 to 8 needle looking things on the end of it. They also pistol whipped him and threatened to kill him. He escaped because they said they were going to get Taco Bell and he was able to get out of the duct tape when they left. After I told the detective all of this, his response was that's pretty much how it happened. This was about 6 years ago. Since then C has passed away due to an unrelated incident. He was only in his late 20s when he passed. Point at it. Since C is now deceased I don't think there is any harm in posting the link to the news story, so if you guys want to see it let me know and I'll post it. I also had another employee at this company questioned for a murder at one point, but that's another story entirely. Point at it. #2 here is the link for the story. Not a manager, but I witnessed a pretty good one back in high school. The choir director at my high school was a real hard ass. He was especially tough on the dozen or so people in the most advanced choir at the school, which was a relatively big deal. He was especially tough on them during the big yearly dinner production. I was part of a string quartet for the same event, and no one cared much when we showed up, but a choir member arriving late was unthinkable. On one of the last days of rehearsal, a full dress rehearsal, a girl shows up something like half an hour late, maybe more. I was involved in the thing for several years, and I had never seen or even heard of this happening before. He immediately demanded an explanation, and she paused and then hesitantly said I found a dead body and had to deal with the police. He clearly didn't believe her, and neither did anyone else. She got yelled at. I think she was made to sing something embarrassing in front of all 50 or so people involved. I don't remember what. She was clearly going to be in trouble for a while, and I think her part might even have been threatened. Very few people made it into that choir at all, and then the parts in the production were even harder to get. The next day, the choir director was profusely apologetic and embarrassed. There was a news article in the local paper about the police investigating a dead body that she had found in the pond by her house. Not the manager, but there was one time I was working on integrating a drug interaction engine into our software. It was centered around an MS SQL database we got from a third party and all the manual testing had passed, but then suddenly I was getting bug reports about specific drug codes we'd already tested sending back incorrect results. I plugged in the codes manually and sure enough, the results in the bug reports were the results the engine was responding with, so I was absolutely positive the problem wasn't in my part of the software. The engine we'd purchased was giving us garbage that wasn't good enough for the boss. This was a big company in Germany, they have thousands of end users. They wouldn't release something so buggy because of the nature of the data. They released updates every month, so I kept digging. I went to the original source and confirmed the format of drug codes, old and new. I don't remember off the top of my head, but one of the components had increased in length and there was an odd way of concatenating it until eventually the whole thing was given an extra digit in the form of a leading zero to make room for new numbers. Since the database had a set length for that field, it was truncating the last digit, the most significant one. This had resulted in drugs with duplicate codes in the interaction engine, and, thus, the errors we were seeing. When I came to the boss with my findings, he was livid. He thought I was trying to pawn off the responsibility on the vendor instead of fixing my bad work. He insisted I go back to the manual and figure it out or leave. Yes, he was threatening to fire me over this. I finally convinced him to look at everything, from the original drug codes and formats to the duplicates and missing digits in the database, and he just went silent. He spent an hour on the phone yelling at the other guys about how such errors could get people killed, and we had a new build in our hands, producing correct results. By the end of the day, I never received an apology. Oh boy. Well, I'm a high school student and this actually has to do with one of my teachers, but very similar. My grandma, who I was very close with, passed away on a Sunday night. I was really torn up for the rest of the night and never got to do my Spanish homework. The next day I go into class a bit early to explain my situation, and my conversation with the teacher, who is widely hated, goes a bit like this. Keep in mind I'm a pretty good student. I have a solid A in the class, and I turn in all my work on time. Me, Hola Sonora. Last night my grandma, who I was really close with, passed away. I didn't get to doing the homework. Could I possibly turn it into you tomorrow, teacher? N. Espinal, por favor. I stared at her blankly until I realized she wanted me to tell her my grandma had died in Spanish. When I didn't respond, she continued with, "You have a record of making up excuses, which I don't. I don't know if I believe you." At that point I was ready to scream, "Do you want me to show you her faking ashes?" But I didn't, and calmly told her I would have my mom email her. The next day my mom emailed her, and she finally decided to believe me. Now it's been like 2 months since that incident, and I still hate her so much. I can't wait till I'm a senior so on the last day I can just cuss her out. Not an employer but employee. At the time my manager and I were on shaky ground. We weren't getting along. I hated his sheet, he didn't care for mine either. He was demanding a report from me which I could only produce on the office computer. I got to the office 2 minutes early, which was an accomplishment, considering I was normally 30 minutes late. I arrive and I see fire trucks and our tiny office just in a massive ball of flames. No sheet, so I'm kinda awestruck, like holy shit. And a few minutes passes by and my boss calls and goes, "Cohen, where are my reports?" I said I can't do them right now. He said, "What's your excuse this time?" I said, "The office is on fire." "What do you mean the office is on fire?" I said, "I mean the entire office is just one big giant faking bonfire." He calls bullshit, says he's going be down to here in 20 minutes, and if that office isn't on fire I'm fired. 20 minutes later he shows up. Sure as shit the office is still on faking fire, and he just stares at it in total disbelief like holy shit. Cohen wasn't lying this time. I guarantee you the first question he had go through his head was, did Cohen set my office on fire to cover up his lateness? To which when he asked a firefighter how long they've been here, the guy told him about 2 hours. FYI, office fire was caused by coworker and his need to keep every faking piece of paper and his space heaters. No one was hurt. This happened to me, not the manager, but I had to get my wisdom teeth out after the second day I started my new job, and I told the GM I wouldn't be able to work for the next 3 days because of the meds. He was the manager I was going to be working with, so he said it was fine, and he knew that I wasn't going to be there, so he could cover my work, since I was still learning anyways. Well, his daughter got really sick, so he was out the same days I was, and another manager came in and wasn't informed of me not being able to work, and me and him didn't get along because he was a jackass, so he assumed I didn't come cause I didn't want to work with him. I show up the first day I can, and he walks up to me and says, "Oh, you finally decided to show up, how nice." To which I responded, I had my wisdom teeth out 3 days ago, so yeah, I couldn't work, and I told the Grams. He didn't believe me, so I called the GM, how then yelled at him cause he told him, but he was too high to remember, and then once he got off the phone asked to see my scars, which I didn't cause that's weird, and went to work. The best part is he tried to steal my oxy the I was prescribed, and got fired a few weeks later, and arrested for sleeping with a coworker who was married and tried to fight her husband who was a cop on duty. A bit of a tragic here, but I want to offer my perspective as a manager of a 400-person technology and service business. In general, people lie because they are afraid. As a manager, it is critically important to build a culture where people are not afraid of the consequences if they make an honest mistake. I find that if you do that, people really have no reason to lie to you. It builds a culture of trust, which is important for any business to be successful for the long-term point. If you fail to do that, people will hide their mistakes or lie about them, and then you will have huge problems that come from out of nowhere and surprise you. You really don't want that as a manager on day one with a new employee. I always commit to them this: I promise I won't fire you out of the blue if you promise not to quit on me out of the blue. I think this helps build a culture where people are honest. So, in my 10 years of management, I don't think I've ever had an employee lie about anything significant, and I've never felt the need to ask for proof to confirm anything they've told me. My husband works with scalpels, not a surgeon or anything, and one jumped the ruler and sliced his finger open, right across the fingernail. Obviously it started gushing like a fountain, but because it was a fresh blade, it was a clean cut and didn't hurt as much as you'd imagine. He got someone to drive him to the ER. His work is pretty close to the hospital, but because he was so calm about it, everyone just assumed it wasn't that bad, and so when the doctors told my partner he couldn't work for a couple of weeks, all his bosses just thought he was either taking the piss or being a bussy. But when the nurse was cleaning it at the hospital, he took some pictures of it. The nurse even pulled it open a bit to show how deep it was for the camera point. When he showed them the pictures, they stopped making jokes about him taking the time off, especially considering he went back to work sooner than recommended, even though he didn't have to. I was actually hired as a new manager and had been at my job for about a week when I got a call about some medical test results. I had to go see the internal medicine doctor right away. Alright, fine. I got dressed for work in case I had to leave right away from there. Got to the doc and she's looking over my tests, won't tell me anything. She leaves the room and leaves a piece of paper on her desk with a bunch of results, but I don't know what any of it means. I snap a picture and send it to my mom, who shares it with friends of hers that are nurses. Their only response was, "That's not good." Doc comes back and tells me to go next door to the hospital and check in on the 9th floor. Still not telling me what is going on. Get in the car. Call my mom. She and my dad are packing and driving up, 3.5 hours away. Call my boyfriend. He's leaving class early to come over. Get up to the 9th floor, and I'm just sobbing. I still have no idea what's going on and no one has told me anything. Get in a room and gown and finally get to talk to a nurse. It looks like your kidneys are failing. I end up having to call into work and telling one of the other managers that I didn't know how long I'd be in the hospital and I'd keep them updated. She didn't believe until the next day when I called to tell them they were doing a biopsy and I wouldn't be out of the hospital for a few days. I ended up working at that job while my health deteriorated and I went on dialysis. Had to leave when my boyfriend, who mostly supported us, left for boot camp and I had to move back home for my kidney transplant. TLDR, after a week at my new job, ended up in the hospital for kidney failure. I was the reason, but it was my wife's work who didn't believe it. I had a persistent little cough that just wouldn't go away. I went in to see my doctor about it, and he told me, before doing any tests, that I was going to hate him for what he was about to do. So he stuck a long Q-tip up my nose to collect a sample and send off to the lab. He told me that my family and I needed to be quarantined for a week because of suspected whooping cough. He told me that my wife had to leave work immediately, she was a teacher, and that the city would be checking in on me. I also had to pull my 3 kids from school. I was a friend of his and his neighbor. I thought he was joking. Quarantined in this day and age. At home, he wasn't joking. The city had new health regulations in place, and he had to follow them. My work wasn't a problem. Quite the contrary, they had heard the coughing and went a little mental, treating it like a medical hazard, which I guess it was. The school, however, didn't believe my wife at all. We had to get the city to call the school district and explain to them what happens. Fun fact, the city stopped being so paranoid about whooping cough about 2 months later when they realized how stupid what they were doing was. Finally, my time to shine. I've been waiting for the moment to share this story with somebody, anybody. I had an employee. We shall call him Jeremy. Jeremy was a full-on silver tinfoil hat wearing crackpot. Conspiracy theories were his bread and butter. The kind of guy who would try to persuade you that aliens and the government were to blame for September 11th. Well, Jeremy would often call in sick for his shifts. Sometimes his excuses were believable, sometimes they were just straight up outlandish. He was on his final warning for being late and not showing. We had a particularly busy day booked in the restaurant and Jeremy knew that he had to be at work at 10 am. 10 am rolls around. No Jeremy. I try his mobile. No answer. 10:30 I try to ring his girlfriend. No answer. 11 am the kitchen phone rings. I pick it up and it's Jeremy. Hey boss, I can't come in today. I'm like, what do you mean? You were supposed to be here an hour ago. He then says that he has to go home because he shat himself from taking too much colloidal silver to combat all the nasty additives in his food whilst walking up the road to the restaurant. I call bullshit. This just sounds like a story to get out of work. He says, well, I'm just down the road, and if you want to see proof, I'm hiding in the bus stop. Poor bugger, he couldn't get a taxi home cause no one would let him in their cab and had to wait for 1/2 an hour for a bus to then get told he wasn't allowed on the bus too. He ended up walking 55 minutes home covered in poo. My wife used to work in a call center and managed about a dozen people. Most of employees were younger and in their 20s, doing hundreds of inbound calls to schedule facelift appointments after a large ad run. The company specialized in upper body plastic surgery for aging women, so they also staffed a few people in their 40s, 50s and 60s that would have a better rapport with the clientele. Call-offs and late arrivals were not a rare thing at all. Mostly she would brush them off and tell them to get on the phone as soon as they got in. One lady in her 50s called while she was running about a half an hour late, saying she had an accident on the way into work and she would be in shortly. My wife, thinking flat tire, minor fender bender, whatever BS excuse she had, didn't matter as she'd be in quickly. When she finally arrived, she explained to my wife that she had an accident in the car, to which my wife asked if she was okay, like, did she spill coffee or something? She said, no, I accidentally defecated myself at a stoplight and I was late because I had to change out of my underwear in the car. My wife casually dismissed her, thinking it was a BS excuse, and told her to get to work, at which point 10 minutes later she came back to my wife's desk with a cinched up plastic grocery bag to prove that it actually happened. My wife told her to go to the bathroom and throw it away immediately and go home if she needed to. The lady shrugged, walked to the bathroom, pitched it, and got on the phones. Needless to say, I got a phone call about 20 minutes later and I almost passed out laughing. My old boss always made himself available to pick up employees who had car trouble snowed in, etc. As in his eyes it makes him a good boss, as well as the fact it stops people using these reasons as excuses when they just can't be asked. One day one of his employees calls up to request the day off as they'd been attacked by an eagle in the middle of the UK, didn't feel like they could drive, and were waiting for her husband to come back from work at lunchtime to take her to the hospital to get checked out. He thought the story sounded rather far-fetched, so offered to come pick her up and take her to the hospital himself to save the husband the bother. He was expecting some more excuses, but was surprised when she agreed and thanked him. Anyway, it turns out as she was leaving for work a stray young hawk, don't know what type, but it was owned by someone else on the street, was pestering her new kitten in the garden. She hid behind some bushes, then jumped out at it as it swooped down, and it ended up clawing her face by accident. The injuries were largely superficial, but it's still one of those stories that you tell folk today, and they don't believe you. April of 2010, I'm with my wife and son at one of those big wall-to-wall trampoline places. I've been on trampolines my whole life, but this day was special. I was doing stupid tricks and got into a position where the way I landed on the mat and that I wasn't wearing socks caused my left foot to stick and fold inwards, severing all of my ankle ligaments, ending with my foot literally on the side of my leg, attached only by skin and Achilles tendon. We all thought it was just dislocated, so I put it back in place. I eventually see a podiatrist. He flips out and sends me for MRI. I'm told I have to have surgery as it's one of the worst injuries he has ever seen. All ligaments severed. So I have surgery. My doctor says no sitting at a desk for like 3+ weeks after surgery. Foot above heart as often as possible. I give this note to my boss, still my boss today, and he just didn't believe the severity of my injury. Calls the drive asking what the fuck and why I can't be at the office. Drive is annoyed by this, calls my boss in as whole when I see him next. The nerve of some people, he said. Work started at 8 AM at my last company. I had about 15 people on my team, associate and senior associate level, so majority of them were 24, 28 years old. I oversaw that team for about 6 years, so I've heard them all. Some highlights: kid was on the train coming into work, sat down on the seat, felt the seat of his pants get wet. He had sat in piss. He sent me a picture of his car keys, and I told him to go home, and he could work from home that day. We all laughed about it the next day. This one wasn't proven. A girl said her cat was meowing all night, and when she came out in the morning, there was a litter of kittens in her kitchen. This was a lie. Believed she was just hungover and didn't want to come in, and that was her best excuse. She never showed a single photo of these kittens to anyone. People who were friends with her on FB never saw a photo or a status. She never brought them up again after about 2 to 3 weeks later. Person lived about 5 blocks from work and would walk to work. She was hit by a bicycle while crossing the street and going through a bike lane. She still came in with the story and showed us a cut. I told her to go home and to consider going to the hospital. The cut wasn't that, but she was clearly shook up from the experience. A kid was jumped at a bar over the weekend. He called out on Monday, and when he came in on Tuesday he had 2 black eyes and a cast on his ankle. This kid liked to go hammocking and amateur tightrope walking, if that's the proper term, on the weekends, where you take a hammock to a park and set up for the day and grill or eat or nap. Or, where you set up a bungee cord string across 2 trees and try to balance on it. He showed us photos of his hammock before, and nowadays I see people do the tightrope balancing at parks a lot. Interesting hobby. Anyways, he got a few stitches in his head over the weekend because the strap broke on his hammock when he was laying on it, and he hit his head on a tree stump below him. He called out on Monday because he was still in pain. Saw the stitches in the story. Those are the ones I remember and laugh about. Usually the other BS reasons were small but believable enough, even if I suspected they were probably just hungover and wanted to use a sick day or a PTO day last minute. One kid would always talk about having fun tailgating NFL games on Sundays with his family and would call out sick on Mondays every 2 to 3 weeks during NFL season, probably from too many beers and hot dogs, and not from having signs of a fever, which was his go-to. not a manager, but this happened to me. I'm in the Navy and work on submarines. One fine Navy day a friend and I went to the maintenance support building to get some snacks out of the vending machines. While riding the elevator up to the second floor, my friend starts jumping up and down making it bounce. It seemed like fun, so I joined him. Turns out elevators have sensors that engage in emergency brake if it thinks it's free falling. With our powers combined, we activated that sensor and got the elevator stuck between floors. We had to use the emergency call button to call the fire department to come get us out of the elevator. The firefighters came down to the pier in their fire trucks like it was an actual emergency, not just some idiots bouncing inside an elevator. Lights, sirens, the whole show. We ended up spending about 4 hours inside that damn elevator. And, because we aren't allowed to have any cell phones or electronics on the boat for security reasons, we had no way of contacting anyone on the boat. Everyone thought we had just left. They were pissed. And of course, thought our story was bullshit. We convinced our chief to call the fire department to confirm our story, and when they did, he just rolled his eyes at us and said, fine point. We did conveniently leave out that we had broken the elevator ourselves, though. I was the one that called up the management point. I worked as a healthcare assistant ACA carer at a nursing home. The Norovirus was about, and I was getting up from the floor after putting slippers on a seated gentleman when without warning he threw up. At the time, a manager and one of the senior carers were either side of him talking between themselves, and in the end the carer and another girl took him to get cleaned up, and I had to clean up the mess. Fast forward to 2 AM that morning at home, and I'm suddenly throwing up over the side of my bed. It slowed to a stop after an hour, to which I started calling into work saying there was no way I was coming in, as I knew what was coming next as I was running back and forth to the loo. No one was answering, and I called every 20 minutes, letting the phone ring for 5 each time. Eventually someone picked up just after 6.30, which was the latest I could call in, and the manager refused to believe I was ill so quickly. She said the senior carer was still coming in, and she was right next to the ill patient at the time. I was only believed because the night staff in the background realized I was the one constantly ringing the damn phone when they were busy. Lady who is terrified of showers was sick in the night, and she/room had to be cleaned top to bottom with skeleton staff numbers. I was threatened there would be an investigation into my veracity of my claim. Seriously, that place was horrible to staff because this other carer had not called in sick. Guess who suddenly threw up very nearly on a patient when serving them breakfast? That senior carer my manager had in as proof I was lying. This happened to me about a decade ago. My roommate and I worked at the same job. Our apartment had an auto-locking door. The only way to open it from the outside was with a key. From the inside you could just slide the lock open. However, it had a rather fatal defect in that if someone locked it from the outside, you couldn't open it from the inside. Anyway, my friend left for work one day before me. Once I was ready to go, I went to the door and found he had locked it. I spent about 15 minutes trying to get it open before finally giving up and calling my boss. Imagine how I felt when I had to tell her I was locked in my apartment. Her reaction was, "You're locked in your apartment? Seriously?" In the background I heard my roommate say, "Oh I locked him in the apartment." My boss was like, "Really? Okay. Just get here if you can." I managed to get out about 15 minutes later by sliding my key under the door to my neighbor, who had just walked out his door. Had a lot of fun trying to explain to him what I needed. I was living in Taiwan and he didn't speak any English. Sorry that I'm another not an employer but employee comment, but there's a bomb and I can't get to my car. I was taking classes at an outreach building a nearby college had in my town, and it shared a parking lot with a building that had something to do with the county jail. Apparently someone didn't like the jail or something because they left a suspicious package on their door. So we were sitting in the far side of the outreach building, so we had less of a chance to get blown up, and I have to call my boss because I worked out of town and the police aren't letting us get anywhere close to the parking lot, let alone the other side of it where I parked. So I tell him I'm not going to be able to work today. There's a bomb in the same parking lot as my car and I can't get to it for the foreseeable future. Well, Can you use another one? No, that's the only vehicle I own. Okay. Can you make it up tomorrow? I mean, I don't see them still dealing with this by tomorrow, so I guess so. Okay. By then, at the beginning of each week, I got to decide what day and time I'll complete the various tasks I had to do, so it wasn't the biggest deal that I suddenly can't do it, but he has to do paperwork on it saying why I'm not where I said I would be. So while he didn't really feel the need to check my story, I don't think he ever really believed me. I had to get a ride from a friend so I could get back home once they finally decided we could escape from the other side of the building. I was the employee. I worked in the print center of an office supply store. I was making a stanchion sign poster in Photoshop for a customer, and it had the Google logo on it. My assistant manager walks through my print center on his way somewhere and sees my computer screen logos are trademarked and copywritten. You can't use that logo. I tell him, but I'm making it for Google. Surely they can use their own logo without sending me a release. He points out, rightly, that the Google campus is a 3-hour drive, at least, away, and there are many of our stores that are closer to them. Plus Google has people that would typeset stanchion signs for them. There is absolutely no way I'm making this for Google. Maybe they'd have me print the sign. Although with as far away as we were, that's still odd, but there's no way they want me to design one point, so I go into my email and pull up the email chain asking me to make the sign, with the multiple @google.com email addresses in it, asking me to typeset a stanchion sign that says whatever it was, include the Google logo, and have it printed and shipped to a specific place on the Google campus. I guess that's okay then. I see people talking about elementary school stuff, so I'll include mine, not work related, and on mobile blah blah blah. In 2nd grade my family owned a boat and lived by a lake. There was a cliff face that you could get to by driving by boat to it. The ledge was probably only 10 feet or so above the water, so my parents, that is my dad, when we didn't take my mom on the boat, let me and my brothers climb up and jump off. One day we took my friend. For some reason we made a joke about holding hands and jumping off, but then I'd let go of his hand. Well, he tried to do the same to me. That didn't work because I was holding on to him, meaning he got dragged down on top of me. He landed on my head and I bit out a chunk of the inside of my lip almost completely through. One hospital trip or threat of stitches and a saline rinse later I'm on a liquid diet for a month. Back in school none of the kids believed me until one day when my mom brought my lizard in for show and tell. She explained to my classmates that I had truly bit through my lip jumping off of a cliff. I was the employee, not the manager, but started getting tooth pain. I was still going to work for about a week. Told my boss that I'd just go to the dentist when I had a day off. One night it becomes unbearable, so I let my boss know at 8:30 am. I started at 4 pm that day, and I'm a casual employee, so legally only required to give 2 hours notice that I was having to go to the dentist as soon as possible. I can't hold it off. I'm in agony, literally crying from the pain. While on the phone, he seems fine about it. I go, turns out I have a jaw infection and my dentist starts telling me how stupid I am if it got into my bloodstream, ECT. I get painkillers and another appointment organized and go to work the next day. One side of my face was ballooned up. When coworkers saw me, they did that grimacing face and the Jesus faking Christ elephant man kind of comment/reactions. Boss turns around and says he doesn't believe me because that's not how a jaw infection works and he doesn't know what I do in my private life, and starts lecturing me about partying. Responsibilities Act. After the follow-up appointment I bring in a letter from my dentist as well as his business card, so that if my boss still doesn't believe me, he can call him and inquire for himself. Turns around and goes, "Ha, well guess I'll believe you." Later found out he'd gone around and asked everyone I work with about my lifestyle choices and why I seemed out of it the day I'd come back. I was on some strong painkillers. Apparently thought I was partying and fed up on recreational drugs. Mate, I work as a casual waitress. All of my time is spent at my 2 jobs or sleeping. I don't want to party like that, but even if I did, ain't got time for that. I once had a colleague who worked in the team I was managing call in sick because his girlfriend had gone into labor. It was the first I had heard of his girlfriend being pregnant, so I yelled at him saying it was a poor excuse and that, if he wasn't sick I expected him to come to work. But he insisted it was true, and we ended the call with me saying that we would have a talk first thing Monday morning to discuss his dedication point. Well, turns out his girlfriend had indeed gone into labor. He hadn't told anyone at the company except for some of his closest colleagues, because the company execs were notorious for finding creative ways to fuck with people whom they expected would take paternity/maternity leave, and just were general dicks about anything from people becoming parents and missing work or just having extended periods of illness. So yeah, turns out he was a good guy and our executives were total assholes, so all in all glad neither me or my colleague are at the company anymore. We suspended a guy 3 days, for something he knew he shouldn't have done. We all kinda thought 3 days for a first offense was steep, but we have been having a lot of problems with that group, and were teaching lessons, kinda crappy, but they all knew they were faking around. He came in that Friday, but then called Monday morning that his aunt died. So he was going to need off Monwed, then called and that he had pink eye and was taking off the rest of the week. Then called on Monday morning that his car wouldn't start, so he was having to figure that out before coming in. We all just assumed he looking for another job, but then he showed up late Monday afternoon, was driving a borrowed car, eyes were still red and halfway closed, and was all sad because he actually had an aunt he was close to die if he was in fact just yanking our chain. Very convincing. We like to think though that it was just a series of very bad coincidences at a bad time. Not a manager, but the employee with the story they didn't believe point. When I worked in security, people were notorious for being abject flakes. We would get all kinds of BS excuses for people not showing up at the last minute. I was on my way to work and fell, hitting my chin on the curb and getting a pretty good concussion. I called work to tell them that I had fallen and hit my head so I wouldn't be in. Got a very skeptical aha from the supervisor. I went to the hospital, got my chin stitched up, and was discharged. I still felt pretty fuzzy and weird, but I lived alone and was kind of afraid to go home on my own. In my post-concussive wisdom, I decided that there was still time left on my shift, so I may as well go to work. We didn't get paid sick days, and at least I would be somewhere where there were people. My supervisor's skepticism resolved when I came wandering in the door. I had a big stitched up gash in my chin, but the side of my face was all road rashes too, though I didn't realize it at the time. It is a testament to what a sheet tie job that was, that they actually let me stay and work when I was clearly not okay. This one was me. I had to call into work because I was busy arresting someone. I'm a security guard and also do bail enforcement. I was scheduled to work for my security job at midnight till 8 AM. No big deal. I'm a night owl, so I prefer these late shifts. My bail bondsman calls and says I need to go pick this guy up from an address that is actually close to the site I'm supposed to run security for. The skip person I'm looking for is non-violent and probably just faked up and forgot his court date. It's about 10 PM, so I drive down with my cuffs and the paperwork in my manila envelope and knock on the guy's door. He answers and I politely tell him what's going on. The guy is upset, but is willing to cooperate. I wait 10 minutes while he calls his boss and kisses his girlfriend. I bum him a cigarette and cuff him in the front door. Being a good sport about this, I drive to the country jail and call the local non-emergency number. Some counties have a door you can go up to, but mine likes us to call, and so everything ends up on tape. It's 10:30 PM and I get parked near the door. 2 officers are supposed to come out in a car, switch my cuffs for this, ask me about him being on anything, or if he is cooperative. What happens is about 45 minutes go by, and I'm still waiting. Whatever, I got time to get to work, but I call into non-emergency, just to make sure they didn't forget about me. The operator picks up, and I tell her my name, who I have, their info, and that I'm waiting for them in the parking lot. The operator then tells me there is a hostage situation at the local hospital and that everyone and their grandma are down there, and it might be a hot minute. It's now 11:45, and I call my boss at my security job and tell him what's going on. Tailbones. Mr. Boss, this is Tally Bones. I'm scheduled to be at the place at midnight. Mr. Boss, hey Bones. Everything okay? Tally Bones, yes sir, I'm fine but I'm going to be late to work. I'm not exactly sure how long. I give him the Cliff Notes version. This wait could be 15 minutes or a few hours, Mr. Boss. Can you just let him go? A hopeful look in my skip's eyes. He finishes his 5th menthol. Tally Bones, I'm sorry sir but I can't. He's wanted for credit card fraud in excess of $20,000 and trafficking a significant amount of meth. Cue sad face of Skip in the back. Thankfully my boss is a great guy and 10 minutes later a state trooper was located to come help the gentleman to his room. I was only about 5 minutes late. This happened a few years ago. In university wind ensemble band, we have principal chairs who are supposed to manage their instrument section. It's a leadership position. I'm a flutist and sat next to the oboe section in the front. During a long rest for them and tacit for me, I overheard the principal oboist whisper scolding the second chair for always bringing her phone to rehearsals. So I look at her stand and there is no phone. There's a tuner, but it's the same brand as his. What the fuck bro? I'm still a little confused until he mentions that hiding it in her boobs is not only very obvious but trashy. Second chair rolls her eyes and says in a louder whisper, that's my insulin pump, then slightly pulls up part of her shirt to show the attachment on her stomach. It's attached to my body. Now, the principal chair is sputtering, scoffing, and making a mini scene in his seat. You're 23. Get it together. Our director is glancing at him and giving him the what the fuck look, since you know, we are all trying to rehearse here. Principal Dick picks up his oboe and before putting it in his mouth, says in a very JNMIL tone, maybe cover up better so I don't see it then. Her top wasn't even low cut, it was a high v-neck from Target or Old Navy. He just wanted to start sheet. His typical day wasn't complete until he puts his foot in his mouth at least once. I was the employee. A couple years back I was living in another state with my girlfriend of the time. I had this sheet tie job kinda like Rent-A-Center, except it was somehow more of a rip-off. I was born with scoliosis, and since my teens I have had back issues to some extent. Well, standing for hours and hours a day took its toll on my back, and I'd call in now and then. Not crazy amounts, but more than they were happy with. One day I'm in the shower getting ready for work and my girlfriend was doing something in the bathroom. She had this little solid glass statuette of a dolphin with a glass base. It was on the back of the toilet and gets knocked over into the tub. The base breaks on the way down and hits my foot with the newly created sharp edge point. I text my boss that I might need to go to the hospital as I have a gash across my whole foot. Boss is like, well, you callin' too much and don't bother coming in. Girlfriend is a nursing program, takes a look at it, says it's not too bad, disinfects it, and patches me up. I go into work, show them my foot, they let me go anyway, but the assistant manager does me a favor and put me as leaving because I was a seasonal position. Not a manger, but as an assistant manger like 10 years ago. A worker was complaining about stomach pains and that she needed to leave. She was a major slacker, barely did any work, and started that very day openly talking about how she wanted to go home early and didn't want to work. I brushed it off because she was totally the type to lie and kill off her entire family if it meant leaving early, not to mention we were already very short-handed. She then asks to leave again or for me to call an ambulance. I figured it was a bluff and said I would call an ambulance. She, at this point, was just sitting in the back holding her stomach. So I called an ambulance. Cut to her getting carried away on a stretcher. She had kidney stones from drinking a 2-liter of Pepsi daily. Even as they carried her away I still thought she was faking. Damn, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think I ever apologized. Totally going to get buried, but I live in the south and our infrastructure is terrible when it comes to snow/ice. This past winter, when it snowed a lot, I ended up stuck in my driveway. I live with my grandparents on a farm. The driveway is basically a dirt road, and I drive a compact car. I told my boss I wasn't going to be able to make it, and she sent me a selfie of her outside a very large truck on the road next to a fallen tree basically staring. If she could make then I could. I responded with a video of my tires spinning in the slush and mud. All I got back was okay. Due to the ice on the power lines, we were also without power, and since we had a well with an electric pump also water, for 3 days funnily enough. The next time it snowed she was at my store until close. When it started to snow, I had to stay 2 hours after close to do price changes, and she told me to be safe getting home as my tires were completely bald. I made it through about 40 miles of my 41-mile drive, and slid off the road turning onto my street. My bumper is now held on with duct tape, and she still can't make eye contact with me if we are in the parking lot together. It was me, and I wasn't an employee but a student. During the last 2 to 3 months of my sophomore year in high school I would ask to go to the nurse's office for Tylenol every day during our weight training class because my back hurt. It happened every single day and was to the point that the gym teacher gave me a lot of crap and asked why I was even in that class if I was never going to do anything. During the first half of the class I did a lot and never really slacked off. I also got a lot of crap from some of the other teachers during those last few months because I didn't do much in their classes either. For example, laid on the floor most of the time and even told the English teacher to just give me an F when she asked me to rewrite a paper I had turned in that was unsatisfactory. A month after school was out for summer I was diagnosed with cancer in my spine that actually paralyzed me from the waist down. The pain I had felt all along was the tumor as it grew around my spinal cord and squeezed the life out of it. The actual paralysis happened in the few days before I was officially diagnosed. The gym teacher changed my grade to passing, and my English teacher still asked me to rewrite the paper from my hospital bed. I was in the hospital for a total of 10 months, and she even sent it back and told me it was a nice rough draft and asked me to correct it and write a final draft. My mom told her to shove it and grade it as is. When I was a manager, a guy had his girlfriend call in to work for him. The employee was a hard worker whom I'd rarely question his story, but it was so bizarre. She said he was in the hospital and couldn't speak, so she was calling. Her story was ridiculous and very dramatic. I immediately thought he was arrested and in jail, and that's why she was covering for him. Turns out he really was in the hospital, just for sickle cell related illness, which she could have just stated as I was aware of that, but she had to make up a story about a pathogen possibly from a homeless man. He only missed 3 days. We had a good laugh when he returned. Those 3 days and one other day were the only days he ever called in for 3 years. The other day was after our team won the World Series. He literally just called me and said he wasn't coming because he wanted to go to the parade and he knew he had built up enough capital with me for never calling, in that I wouldn't give him hell for it. Speaking of the homeless, a colleague went to have an off-site meeting with one of our programmers at Starbucks. We work in a downtown metro, so homeless people are everywhere. The homeless man grabbed the programmer and started punching him in the back of the head and then started screaming, "Get off of me," before running out and into the street. Nobody believed their call on why they wouldn't be back until they came in the next day with the police report. I had a similar experience with my professors this semester. The flu hit my area pretty bad because the vaccine had missed the mark on the specific strain this year, so I ended up getting the flu early in the semester. I already have chronic pain and fatigue, so the aches and fatigue from the flu made me think I was just having the worst flare-up in my life. I had to miss class for over a week as well as miss meetings and events I was supposed to go to for my major. I got a note from the school nurse, who insisted I stay home for at least a week, and sent it to all my professors. 2 decided to still dock me points for my attendance grade, on top of zeros for the in-class work I missed while I was out. Thankfully they didn't fail me for absences, which one was very tempted to do. That same professor also faked me over with another should have been excused absence. There's 3 tests we have to take for my major, education, in order to move on to the next year and to get certified when we graduate. I had to take the second test this semester, so I can student teach next year, and pretty much the only times available were during class time. So, not only did I have to pay $150 out of my own pocket to take this test, but I had to miss classes to do it, because it was an hour's drive away, and the site was hard to find, so extra travel time was needed. I gave notice that I will have to miss class, and it wasn't supposed to be an issue. Come the end of the semester, I have one absence too many and could be failed for absences. I ask about the day I had to take the test. She said she was going to excuse it for other people too, so I just needed to send her proof. Well, I sent my proof, and she still denied my request to have it excused, on the basis that I could have chosen any other time, rather than her class to take it. But considering it took a full month to get scores back, and I was under the impression it had to be done by the end of the semester, I didn't think I really did have any other options. I picked the latest time in the day they had, but I guess it just wasn't a good enough excuse. Anyway, she still took off attendance points, but I ended up passing the class anyway. I have an opposite story that I gave to my manager, who thought it was BS, but turned out to be true. Fuck him. It was the ice storm of '98, Southern Ontario here, and the morning after, the mayor was on the radio telling everyone to stay home, don't go anywhere, etc. Streets covered in fallen branches, trees, power lines, etc. Not to mention all the ice. I called my boss to say I wouldn't be in, like a good little employee, and he said why, and I kind of stuttered. Ice storm? He said what ice storm? He literally lived in this little 2-block square part of the city that simply didn't get any rain/ice overnight. I guess he doesn't listen to the radio or turn on the news in the morning, cause he totally thought I was cheating him. He said get in here right away. I arrived promptly, 5 days later, after our power and heat had come back on sufficiently to thaw out our house. It was 11 degrees C inside when the heat finally came back on. That's about 52 F for you southern neighbors fun times. And again, fuck him.